Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. Syamant Sandhir is Director of Learning and Technology at Futurescape, based in Gurgaon, India, a city that's just outside the capital, New Delhi. Futurescape is focused on helping companies meet environmental, social and governance goals, with a focus on how issues such as sustainability affect the customer experience. I called Syamant to ask about sustainability and how it can influence or impact the customer experience. Okay, let's go straight to the interview. Okay, great. Thanks for being on the podcast. Now, I know that some colleagues of yours at Futurescape recently published a book focused on responsible business in the digital age. Could you summarize the message of the book? And what does it mean for executives that are designing a modern customer experience?
Okay. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background of the work that we do. I'm the Director of Learning and Technology, and Futurescape is essentially focused on helping companies create sustainable experiences. And there's a need to reimagine experiences for what we call the age of responsibility, from business models that factor in the complete journey from conception to recycling. Now, we wanted to actually have a very basic data-driven approach to this. And about 8 years back, we started a study of India's top companies. And this company focused on, initial study was really about, what's the brand promise versus what the companies were doing. But it soon became apparent that we needed a holistic approach. So we've been looking at this for a while now. We look at the publicly available data, the annual reports, and so on, and have a very clear perspective on environment, social, and governance factors of our company's operations. So the authors, and the book is called Balance Responsible Business for the Digital Age, and it's essentially an amalgamation of the learnings of the study. And the authors focused on people, planet, and data, and essentially, the key aspects of companies' operations. So typically, a modern customer experience talks about customer journeys and integrated digital experiences. Now we're talking about spatial moments like AR and VR, and then there is the emerging aspects of machine learning and AI. But I think the book focuses on sustainable experience transformation with essentially 5 key imperatives. One, obviously, the climate crisis and the operations of a company, the ongoing digital transformation and the future of work, but the critical aspect of circularity in products and services becomes very important. And then there are the aspects of the sustainable development goals that companies have actually, companies and countries have actually signed up for and are committed to sort of fulfilling that charter. And finally, the emerging aspects of environment, social, and governance in the financial operations of the company as well. So customer experience then becomes a lot more than just the transactional front end, but becomes then it sort of builds on the need to go beyond the silos and address these 5 imperatives, even as we sort of address what is most important for the customer.
Yeah, so if we're thinking beyond just the transaction itself, I mean, in your study, are you finding evidence that consumers are actually concerned about environmental or social policies of the companies that they buy from? And did you notice any difference regionally?
So there are 2 points. One point is that customers are not homogeneous in that sense. There are different concerns of customers depending on where they stay and their life stage. However, there is another point to consider, which is that research will always say that customers care for sustainable companies, and yet there is a large number of customer base who would go for that better deal. So there is a little bit of that dichotomy. But it's also a brand's responsibility to be the custodian of sustainability. Frankly, it is still very early days and there is more to be done. But there is still a lot of trust in that organic tag or the promise of renewable energy. But if the supply chain means that your product is being shipped from halfway across the world, there are significant points to consider there. Plus, sustainability means many things in the customer journey. It could be the environment, social and governance, but also the customer expects the company to do the right thing. Brands that have actually violated that trust have had issues and have had to make changes. In a sense, sustainable practices have to be adopted as a proactive measure than being on the firefighting side of it. That's one aspect. The other aspect is customer journeys increasingly are not B2B. And then there is a aspect of B2 business to business journeys that need to be discussed, because we are part of connected ecosystems. So if you're talking about jobs to be done in the retail context, for example, then the customer will look at, say, a cool holiday, a safe medical procedure, and so on. Maybe just look good for that meeting. But all kinds of omni-channel on one side. Then there is that buyer, who's buying raw material for the latest design, okay? And they are incentivized to, essentially take a top-selling product. Their incentive systems focus on, ensuring that the product sells well, okay? And sustainable materials may not be really top of the mind for them. So that needs to change, and those journeys need to be imagined, and the organization has to think about it in a slightly more holistic manner. And finally, if I would talk about a slight difference, increasingly, if you take the example of the fashion industry, we're talking about slow fashion as one of the answers to the climate crisis. But there's slow fashion on one side, and then there is 5G on the other. There is a little bit of a dichotomy, and there is a little bit of a cultural change and that need to be done, because there is a generation that has been brought up on multiple fashions, and there is this aspect of social media which actually perpetuates ongoing sort of change in customer activities.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on that point about the regional aspect, then. And let's say fast fashion as an example. Is it more that like consumers in California that are wealthy are starting to pay attention to where their clothes come from, but most of the world just wants the cheapest possible shirt?
I think there are customers who want, who care about, the details of sustainability in the sense where they come from and so on. But there is also a very large base of customers who are really expecting the brands to do the right thing there and, make those good decisions. And, I don't think that has changed all that much. So when we talk about the differences between, say, regional, the regional differences could be, are we at that stage where, say, a particular brand has good, sustainable practices for, across the world, or maybe they are a little bit more compliant of the standards in, say, a single region as opposed to maybe some of the other regions, right? So there is, when you look at the reports per se, you will see a difference, and that difference is a journey and is a transition that has not, it's still at early stages.
Okay, so if I'm thinking about the actual customer experience, the customer journey, how does a big macro level challenge such as climate change actually sort of impact that experience of the customer?
Okay. If you look at the key emerging points today, increasingly in the product design and customer experience aspect of it, you're hearing increasingly about zero-waste design. You're hearing about circular design. But then you're also hearing about the no plastics movement, or the issue of single-use plastics. So in this context, companies are, they're moving towards making those changes. There are some companies who are doing better. So there are some companies who are not doing as much. But there has been a perception that this world is about abundance. You can travel where you want, eat the food from halfway across the world, and airline reward programs are what they are. But the reality of climate crisis is that consumption behaviors need to change as well, for individual customers as well as for business. So increasingly, you're hearing about, water footprinting or carbon footprinting or extraction of existing products for, reuse much, into other products. So, that those are very interesting new journeys in product design and, product services that are starting. So essentially, if you look at the journeys itself, then product design and the related data are going to be substantially different. For a while, we've measured things in terms of profit, but increasingly companies are committing themselves to measuring stakeholders, aspects of it, and measuring well-being. So then the big shift is that companies are going to start measuring either by diktat or social pressure things that they have not previously measured. Okay, and retail design, for example, if you look back at retail design, there is talk of phygital and there's talk of omni-channel and the store coming near you, but there is also a acceptance that the carbon footprint of each of these choices has to be a part of corporate programs. So how do you make retail environments and experiences sustainable and profitable in line with customer expectations? But for example, if you take another example of, say, hotels, there is quite a lot of pushback about pools in these hotels, for example, and local communities are beginning to fight back. Companies are also making an effort to make a change. But does that mean, for an experienced designer, there is some, a new opportunity? Okay, maybe esports in the hotel instead of the pool, for example. And then if you take another industry, the wine industry, it's worked quite a bit on imagery, and there is the front-end experience of the glass bottle and all the related implications. But the industry also needs to factor in, and they are beginning to factor in things like the glass bottle, which takes a lot of energy, right? And there are, should you be using the bottle again, or should it be broken? There are cultural aspects of the brand communication that also will come into play here. And these are the kind of experiences that, either they need to be, redesigned, or at least, there is complete new journeys that we need to think about.
And I suppose then what you're saying is that if companies remain ignorant and don't develop some of these sustainability changes to the customer journey, like the wine bottle recycling you were mentioning, I mean, yeah. Ultimately, if they ignore these changes, it's going to hit their bottom line.
The reality is that the Sustainable Development Goals are one of the many commitments that countries and companies have made. There is a lot of documentation that's going on with various statutory reports with timelines. It could, there are, so the SDG related thing, but then there are companies are being encouraged to sign up for the zero, programs like the zero waste, or, figure out ways on how they're going to manage, say, plastics. But in terms of, whether they are going to, whether it's going to impact their bottom line, I think the biggest 50 banks have made sustainable finance commitments. The list is increasing. And I think, a lot of companies are also beginning to talk about stakeholders, and, the stakeholder activism is also on the rise. So future funding of company operations might be problematic for companies that do not make those changes. The other element is trust and transparency in supply networks. It's becoming important, and tracing the fiber or tracing the fruit to its origin brings up new experiences and journeys, whether they matter, to whom they matter, and what are the benefits and opportunities for a company. That needs to be debated, and those experiences certainly need to be defined. In fact, the emphasis that a fiber made across different, from the time it's made to the time it's recycled into something else, that entire journey needs to be fully in place. There are fairly interesting technology solutions available. There are and those kind of solutions need to be factored into operations. So essentially, the transition is a journey, and the companies need to make those investments in innovation. I mean, it's an opportunity to innovate. So some technologies may exist today, others may be work in progress. So a company may have, say, 40,000 people who are, who they need to bring into this new journey, right? And there is a significant aspect of knowledge transfer. So one is the financial aspect of it. Then there is a knowledge transfer across the company's operation and into the extended network of operations, which needs to also take place.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, I suppose the reality is, though, an example like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola recently announced they're going to continue to ship millions of plastic bottles all over the world because that's what the customers want to buy. So are these kind of customer demands and the demands of the customer to just go on doing the same thing they've always done, does that override any kind of social initiatives that the companies want to undertake?
I feel brands have a role to play in effecting change because this is a transitionary phase. There will be pushes and pulls on either side. And, a lot of these alternatives may not be immediately available. We may say no to single-use plastics, but it does bring in the question of health and food safety experiences. So what do we do with that particular question is for the companies to consider. I'm sure that, they may have a roadmap in mind and they may be looking to do something about it. For example, a plastic or a PET bottle, might be considered bad, but we need to reimagine new experiences where supply chains are integrated in a manner that one company's waste is another company's resource. So companies are focused on find and buy and service and help experiences. But in a similar vein, the emphasis will increasingly be also on the recycle intent and how new experiences can be imagined. I think rather than view it as a compliance or a social issue, this is an opportunity for companies to connect and collaborate at a different scale while at the same time giving customers the experience that matter to them.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned at the beginning that your research included a look at responsible artificial intelligence. And I know that a lot of the CX companies that are planning interactions with customers, they're using AI. There's a lot of automation going on in the interaction with customers. So what is responsible AI and how is it different from just normal AI?
I think there are enough examples of vulnerability, leakage of sensitive customer information, including misuse of that data, home security being another example. Quick should not mean quicksand. And so the investments in AI, while productive, need to have an awareness of their impact. If you're thinking of life cycle impact of physical products, then there is a need to undertake and manage the digital experiences impact as well. Trusteeship of data, is something that we talk about a lot. So yes, there are significant breaches that have taken place. Equally, the leakage of information may be caused by weak data safety practices. We started a study of how people secure their information as we wanted to understand the data safety experience. The results around something as basic as, say, two-factor authentication or password managers was damning. I mean, roughly 15% of people studied over the last 5 months have actually implemented these best practices. So there's an issue for the data safety experience to be considered and improved upon. There is a significant concern about the surveillance economy, but largely my comment would be for marketing and brands. We can't be following the latest tech feature in the quest for numbers. This is beginning to undermine brand values. I think brands will be called upon to be responsible about their data practices. And I think the ethics of the overall operations will also be defined by it can't be as silo again of responsible AI, but actually responsible operations and responsible practices that also transcend into the technology and initiatives.
Okay, and so we've covered the technology aspect and recycling and social responsibility. Finally then, just as a sort of look back at all of those topics, where will we see the first impact on the customer experience, in 2020 because of this wave of social responsibility?
I think over a period of time, sustainability will not be a department. It needs to be a key skill or practice within each function of a company. So each product choice, material selection, process decision, or the technology stack in the journey, will need to weigh a sustainability score in line with the compliance needs of the company, country, and region. We will still talk about customers, brands, and people, but the journey to more sustainable practices will need to be quantified, and that's pretty much the starting point.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm at Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.